Today, we break down Cody Latimer's recent off-the-field drama and whether he still fits with the Broncos. John Elway's contract extension or lack thereof goes under the microscope, and we attempt to answer 5 questions that will determine the fate of the 2017 Denver Broncos. You are listening to the Huddle Up Podcast.
Welcome to the Huddle Up Podcast, your go-to show for all things Broncos.
What is good, Broncos country? Welcome in to the Huddle Up Podcast presented by Mile High Huddle. It's time to drop some knowledge and have a little bit of fun while we're at it. I'm your host, Chad Jensen, Scout Media, CBS Sports Digital. With me is Will Keys, as always, editor and writer at Mile High Huddle. Will, did you get any laughs out of Peyton Manning during the ESPYs?
What's up, Chad? I definitely did. I was pretty pleased to see Manning deliver that good roasting to Kevin Durant. I think it was his opening monologue.
Right.
But he kind of called him out for switching from the Thunder to the Warriors, saying that he was going to join the USA women's gymnastics team. But Durant, he didn't look too happy with it. And so I think if his Twitter activity isn't enough indication, I think he's kind of outed himself as someone who can't take a joke. And I'm glad Peyton Manning did that on the national stage.
Peyton will probably send him one of his famous letters, like after the fact, he'll be like, Dear Kevin, I apologize if my roasting the jokes that were written for me by a group of writers at ESPN offended you in any way, because in fact, what I did was actually quite similar. I joined a team that was very stacked, and we ended up going on and winning a world championship, so I feel your pain.
I'm a little offended that you're implicating that Peyton Manning didn't write his own jokes.
He is savvy in that way, as he's very comedic in nature. I mean, how many times can we remember when he's at the podium and he would crack wise and we'd all get a nice little chuckle? And I don't want to take anything away from him, but I think we'd be deluding ourselves, Will, if we didn't, point out that he had some help in the creative aspect of many of those jokes.
I won't sit here and listen to that, but
It sure was fun to watch Peyton up there. It's been a while since we got to see him in the limelight and under the bright stars, so it was fun to see Peyton. But today's episode is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/huddleup. Over 180,000 different titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. That's audibletrial.com/huddleup. This is a product and a service, Audible, that I use each and every day. Don't always have time. I'm a big reader, voracious reader, in fact, and I don't always have time to sit down and actually turn the pages on the books that I want to read. And having Audible and a membership gives me the opportunity to get through those books during my commutes, or if I'm, in the kitchen or in the yard. So check that out. Remember, you actually get, when you try the 30-day free trial, you get a free book, and there's 180,000 options, some really good titles, and it's a great way to help support the show. Again, audibletrial.com/huddleup. Now, our show is here to give you a deep dive on your favorite team, the Denver Broncos, and we need your help. We can't grow the show without you. Take a second and make sure you're subscribing, obviously, but also take a second and rate and leave a comment, whether you are an Apple user and it's iTunes, or if you're on Android, you're using Stitcher. Take a second and do that, because it helps us out tremendously in terms of growing our audience and getting the show out to new listeners. Follow the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod and at Mile High Huddle. Also take a second and like the Mile High Huddle Facebook page. We're knee-deep in the dead time on the NFL calendar, but we have less than 2 weeks until training camp kicks off, and we are going to be here each and every week, continuing to bring you compelling content, and you're not going to want to miss a single episode. All right, well, let's get to some Broncos talk. We had Cody Latimer, unfortunately, in the news over the weekend. It was reported on Sunday when TMZ released the security footage that Latimer got into an altercation with a bouncer outside of a Dayton, Ohio strip club back in February. And in the video, Latimer can be seen kind of putting his hands on the bouncer. At first, it looks like he's just kind of like maybe trying to calm him down. The bouncer doesn't appreciate it, keeps swatting Latimer's arm down. But Latimer just keeps coming back and putting his hand on the guy. And Latimer, again, he claims that he was trying to kind of de-escalate a scenario that involved between his uncle and the bouncer. But what ended up happening was finally the bouncer swats Latimer's arm away with some vehemence, and Latimer comes back and then open hand kind of slaps the guy. Didn't look like it arrived with much force, but he did land on the guy's face. And then from there, scuffle breaks out. The uncle jumps in. Latimer gets pepper sprayed in the face, and then he kind of wanders off screen. Meanwhile, his uncle literally gets knocked out by the bouncer. It's quality tape. But the NFL and the Broncos have known about it for a while. Denver's statement on the issue to Mike Kliss of 9 News was, quote, "We are aware of the matter from several months ago involving Cody Latimer, and it has been discussed with him," closed quote. Now, on his own, Latimer released a statement on Twitter, and it was interesting. Here's what he had to say, quote, "It's unfortunate that something from 6 months ago that didn't result in anything all of a sudden becomes a big story. But I get the world we live in and all the attention we have on us. I've talked to Coach Joseph and the Broncos, have been very upfront and explained everything. Although I was just trying to settle things down, I know I have to be careful of the situations I put myself in because I expect a lot of myself. I've been grinding and focused on football this entire offseason, have given my life to Jesus, and I'm on a really positive path. I'm heading to church with my family now to continue my journey while getting ready for camp and a great season." So that's close quote. So we'll get to the big picture stuff, but Latimer's statement, just right off the cuff, rubs me wrong. It's a yeah, but type of apology. Yeah, I made a mistake, but then comes out, and then comes the excuses. Instead of, complaining that this was reported on, this was 5 months old or whatever, how about just man up and say you screwed up and that you've talked with your head coach, you've been grinding, you've given your life to Jesus. Why don't you just go with that aspect of your little statement instead of saying, I can't believe this came out, it's 5 months later, I'm a changed person. Not exactly the epitome of contrition, Will.
I don't know. It doesn't really bother me because, first of all, when I heard about this and looked into it on TMZ's actual report, they don't mention anywhere that this happened in February. If you just read TMZ's story, because they have a little 3-paragraph article to go with the video, it's not just the video alone.
Right. But
if you read that without any context, you'd think that this happened like last night or like this weekend sometime.
That's true. That's a fair point.
And it didn't. It came out last February. And so I don't think he owes you or me or anybody outside of the organization or outside of that particular situation an apology. He's already talked to Coach Vance Joseph. He's talked to whoever he needed to at the NFL level, I'm assuming. So I don't think just because TMZ got their hands on the video and decided to put it out when they did, which is 5 months after the fact, and we know from tracking Cody Latimer's whatever on his social media activity over the last 5 months that he's been a changed person, and it gives a little context now that we know about what happened. Not that this is a particularly egregious situation, but he was baptized. He's a different guy, and I think it would be a pretty weak move by the Broncos to cut him just because the story is made public now, and I don't think they're going to. But, just because TMZ made this available in July at a particularly bad point in the offseason to do so when there's no news and this is going to get a lot of attention.
Definitely
I don't think
inconvenient, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he owes everybody an apology tour now.
Well, I would disagree with you on the apology side. I think anytime you get caught in a situation publicly that is unprofessional, not only do you owe it to the team, but you do owe it to the fans to kind of square up and face that. But, the irony of this story breaking on Sunday is that the day before on Saturday, I sat down, pounded out a 2,100-word State of the Broncos story on the wide receivers, and I deep dived on Denver's situation at receiver. And in that piece, before I had any knowledge of the TMZ footage, I kind of put forth the idea that Latimer, after 3 years of ineffectual performance, being a former second-round pick, that he's already on thin ice with the Broncos. And I think we can talk a little bit more about ramifications here in just a minute. But you look at his 3 years with the Broncos. I think it was 16 receptions, if I remember right, doing the piece yesterday, in a 3-year career, 16 receptions. Now think about that. So then he chips in 6 special teams tackles last year as a gunner. That's great. Good for him. But it's not worth the $1.18 million the Broncos are going to have to pay him this year if he sticks around. In a piece on Sunday covering the Latimer TMZ incident, I said that NFL teams are not in the habit of paying special teams gunners more than $1 million per year. And I should have also said that they're not in the habit of paying their 6th or 7th best receiver that kind of money either. And if you look at the situation right now, Will, the team can actually save more than $925K by waiving him before the final cut down, so before the regular season starts. So I'm not saying, and I want to back this up just so people understand, in no way am I saying that incident with TMZ and getting basically sprayed in the face with pepper spray, there was no arrest, there was no charges, there's no nothing. That to me is not grounds to cut Cody Latimer. I don't care where you're coming from in that regard. But it does just kind of add to this lack of momentum and the issue that Cody Latimer is running out of time. So for you, though, in your mind, is Latimer on thin ice with the Broncos this summer? Is he in a kind of Monte Ball-esque make-or-break situation?
Yeah, no, definitely. Of course he is. If you look at how much they can save by cutting him, it makes a lot of sense from a financial standpoint. And obviously there's a lot of competition at wide receiver, and we'll get to that later. But he's got, Jordan Taylor and Benny Fowler and also Marlon Brown to compete with at the bottom of that depth chart. I mean, I don't think any of us are worried about Carlos Henderson or Isaiah McKenzie making the roster. But, if he doesn't make it, that's fine, and it should be based on performance and then performance related to his contract that decides his roster status. Hopefully this incident doesn't really have any say on whether or not he makes the team.
Right. And the issue with Latimer is he is so talented physically. I mean, he does have a lot of talent. His problem has been between the ears. He hasn't been able to put it all together and really show his teammates, show the coaches that he has the wherewithal to be counted on game day. And, you see that where you got Demaryius Thomas, you got Emmanuel Sanders, they're always going to be 1 and 2. But then when you have former undrafted guys like Jordan Taylor and Benny Fowler ahead of you by leaps and bounds on the depth chart, in terms of snaps, targets, and everything. I mean, it's quite the indictment on Cody Latimer, and it's so frustrating again because he does have a ridiculous amount of talent. I honestly hope, the Broncos invested a 2nd-round pick in him. I hope this is the summer in which he puts it all together, but, after 3 years in the league, in most cases, by and large, guys really are what they are.
I think we should give this to Latimer, give him credit for being a second-round wide receiver out of Indiana that obviously hasn't panned out in his first 3 years. But he hasn't been a selfish guy, and it's not something that players drafted, especially wide receivers, in the first 2 or 3 rounds will often do. But he just put his head down and became a really good special teams player, a really good gunner. He returns kicks occasionally. He had a really nice kick return against Cincinnati last year. And he makes plays in special teams. Like, think about that Sunday night New England game where he swung that when he forced the fumble. I don't know if he forced the fumble or he recovered it on that one punt that really swung the game and then allowed the Broncos to come back from 2 touchdowns. But if it's not on offense, he's made an impact some way. And I think that's not something you often see from guys that don't pan out in the first 1, 2, 3 rounds, because usually, if they didn't accomplish what they set out to do on offense, they're just going to, pout, especially at the wide receiver position. But he hasn't done that. So he's been a really good team player, I think. And
I would agree with that you got to tip your hat to him that, he's found a way to at least make some kind of an impact. And it's not that he doesn't have value. I mean, his raw ability alone, there's value there as a receiver. And the way he can impact special teams is definitely plenty of value there. At this point, the problem the Broncos are going to have, the issue they're going to have to address is value. Does what Cody Latimer brings to the table right now, does that value, is it worth it? Is it worth it to keep him around where we could be paying someone who could probably get us 5, 6, 7 special teams tackles as a gunner this year and pay him, less than half of that.
Yeah, it might not be. And so we'll have to, evaluate that based on how he does in training camp and how he does in the preseason.
Now, in other news, John Elway and the Broncos are yet to agree to a contract extension as of the recording of this episode. According to one source close to the team, the Broncos have made Elway more than one offer, and up to this point, they've yet to agree on anything. After saying publicly earlier this year that he plans on being with the Broncos, quote, for a long time, close quote, the question is, why has he not signed? You look at Baltimore's Ozzie Newsome. He's currently the highest paid GM in all of football, coming in around $3.7 million per year. And it's interesting because GM numbers and salary figures don't really come out much in the media. They're not tracked by organizations like Spot Track or Over the Cap. So you really have to go off specific reporting to ever find out how much any of these guys are making. But you look at Seattle's John Schneider. He signed a new contract last year, which puts him really close to Ozzie Newsome, reportedly. Denver has made an offer to Elway that would make him the highest paid GM in the NFL, and yet there's still been no deal. What we've been told is that there have been two mitigating factors here to the delay. One is the issue of possible ownership. Elway could be looking for an ownership stake in the Broncos, but there are some rules and policies that govern ownership in the NFL. And even if the Pat Bowlen Family Trust were willing to give up a stake in the Broncos to Elway, it would have to be approved by the league, and those type of legal issues are complex, and they can take a lot of time, frankly, to iron out. So that kind of muddies the water, and it could significantly slow down any resolution on an extension. The other complication is a matter of politics. John Elway is a famous Republican. We can all remember his meeting with Tony Romo at Donald Trump's inaugural party back in Washington, D.C. earlier this year. And knowing his power, his popularity in Colorado, his reputation, the GOP, in so many words, from what we've been told, propositioned Elway about running for governor. And it wasn't a slam dunk decision for Elway. He mulled it over, but it sounds like he's chosen to stick around with football and stay with the Broncos. Then on Sunday, more reports come out that a 5-year deal with the Broncos is imminent, and it sounds like it could be done before the Broncos kick training camp off on July 27th. So for you, Will, how do you interpret this situation? Do you think that's pretty much the crux of it, what we've laid out so far? Or why do you think it's taken this much time to get Elway locked up?
Yeah, I mean, no one really knows what his political ambitions are at this point. But I do think that John Elway is probably one of, if not the only one, I think he's one of the few Republicans that could run for governor and win in Colorado. But I think he's just taking his time, really. And I think he wants to be the highest paid GM, and he deserves it. But, we always talk about how stubborn he is in negotiations with players, famously stubborn, and he usually gets his way.
Right.
Or at least he has his price, and he sticks to it. And I think we're seeing what happens when the shoe is on the other foot, and he is on the other end of the negotiation table, and he's just as stubborn, and he has his price, and that's probably above where Ozzie Newsome is. And he's going to get it, I think, either way. And I think he's got good reason to demand that money. He's been incredibly successful since he joined the team in 2011. And another thing is he understands leverage. Like, he's the master of leverage. If you go back and think about where he was as the potential number one pick in the 1983 draft, and the Baltimore Colts had the first pick, and he did not want to play for Frank Kush and the Baltimore Colts, who were a really, really just poorly run franchise that was clearly on the way out, and it proved to be true a few years later. But he had an out with baseball and the New York Yankees, and he said, well, if you pick me, it doesn't matter. I'll just go play baseball instead. I'm fine doing that. And I think he's got a little bit of leverage, whether it's true or not, that he actually wants to be involved in politics and maybe run for governor or whatever. He's got a little bit of leverage with the Broncos saying, well, if you don't give me the money that I want to be GM for the next 5 years,
right,
I'll just go into politics, and that's fine with me too. And you can find someone else to replace me who's obviously not going to be as successful, because no one has been as successful as John Elway in his first 6 years.
Yeah, and there's a part of me, and I don't, just so you know, quick disclaimer, I have no reason to necessarily believe this. I haven't been told this by any source, but it wouldn't surprise me if this whole nod for governor, this possibility, was basically concocted out of thin air in order to create more leverage for John Elway.
Yeah, it's possible.
because he made his. I mean, there's times that GMs and head coaches and such say things publicly and do another thing in practicality. But he's been saying for the better part of the last year, actually, that he plans on staying with the Denver Broncos for a long time. But if he's going to get that dollar, if he's going to become the highest paid GM in football, he's got to create maybe a little bit more leverage. And who knows, maybe the whole governorship for Colorado could play into that. But as you say, he's been wildly successful since he joined the Broncos front office. And if you go back, well here's some factoids. Let me put it this way. That kind of put into perspective really how prolific John Elway has been as Denver's front office czar. In Elway's first 100 games, the Broncos won 71, which is believed to be the most by any NFL GM in his first 100 games in league history. If you look at Pro Football Hall of Fame general managers through their first 100 overall games, Al Davis is the closest to Elway. He had 69 wins, total wins. Bill Polian, 61 as the Buffalo Bills head or GM, and then you can go back down the list. But Elway's already in some elite company with what he accomplished in that first 100 games. He's the only GM in the last 5 years to acquire future Pro Bowl players through the draft, unrestricted free agency, street free agency, and college free agency. Wrap your brain around that. Since he was hired in 2011, Elway's Broncos ranked second in the NFL in total wins with 73. They also have the second most regular season wins at 67. New England, of course, number one at 75. And then Green Bay is right behind Denver with 66 regular season wins since 2011. Elway's Broncos have won 5 division titles. Of course, they were all consecutive. 2 conference championships and a Super Bowl. And then lastly, during Elway's 6 seasons as an executive, he has signed or extended the contracts of 14 players who have combined for, it's actually more than this. I believe it's 29 Pro Bowl selections with the Broncos. Because when the Broncos put out that in a press release to the media, it was before a couple of the guys who were alternates were actually invited or elected to the Pro Bowl. So you look at his body of work, Will, pretty impressive stuff. This is why the Broncos have to be willing to pay him that top dollar to stay. And on top of that, Elway, I think, has to feel maybe a major draw to stick around and finish his unfinished business with Paxton Lynch. And to me, if you look at him from a legacy perspective as a GM, that's really the only unresolved issue hanging around his neck. And I think that could be another thing, new head coach, young quarterback, first-round pick, unresolved, motivating him to continue in football.
I guess so. I mean, maybe. But it's not his job to develop the first-round quarterback, really. I mean, as you know, but he's really just the guy shopping for the groceries, and the coaching staff does the preparation. And it's hard for him, probably, as a former quarterback, to keep his hands out of it. But I think he's done a pretty good job since he joined in 2011, and he had Tim Tebow and Kyle Orton to worry about. You know, if I was a former Hall of Fame quarterback, it'd be very tempting to get out there on the field and practice and try to teach these guys a couple things to make the team better. But he's done a good job letting his coaches coach. But you know, he's surrounded Vance Joseph, his rookie head coach, with some veteran guys like Bill Musgrave and Mike McCoy, who have a chance to really improve the quarterback situation. But you know, if he here on out and he keeps winning, I don't think that his success in the draft is going to do anything for or against his legacy, especially against, because – and we don't know how Paxton Lynch is going to play out and how that pick's going to be perceived 5 to 10 years from now. Could go either way, really, at this point. But I think he takes as much pride in the late-round gems like Trevor Siemian than he does with the first-round picks like Paxton Lynch, Sylvester Williams. You know, maybe not Von Miller, because that was a surefire Hall of Fame pick in his first pick as general manager back in the 2011 draft, right after Cam Newton. But if you remember, after that 4-touchdown game against Cincinnati where Siemian lit it up in his first game on the road, he went back on Twitter to a reply to his tweet that announced that he had picked Trevor Siemian in the 7th round, and someone called that pick a reach.
Right, Elway did.
And he went back. Yeah, Elway went back all the way to that tweet, which was a year and a half ago in the 2015 draft or right after, and went back and replied to that tweet specifically.
Oh, yeah.
And if that doesn't show you like how much pride Elway takes in his late round picks, or just how, insane or competitive, whichever word you want to use, I think they might be synonymous when you're talking about Elway.
Insanely competitive.
And so that's a good politically correct way to put it. But I think that, makes the case that Elway just wants to win, and he doesn't care if he does it with 7th-round guys or if he does it with 1st-round guys.
One question that comes into play for Elway, and you hear it on Twitter at times, you hear it when you engage in conversation around the water cooler, how much of Elway's production in his 6 years in the front office, how much of that has to do with the one major accomplishment, or one of many, but one of the main accomplishments in his career, which was signing, lubing that deal that got Peyton Manning in Denver? Because without Peyton Manning in Denver, you go back in time to that 2012 offseason, Tim Tebow's still your quarterback, and from there, who knows what could have happened? All the way, different ways dominoes could have fallen. But how much in your mind, Will, we can talk about this, in your mind, how much do you think Peyton Manning has to do with the legacy and what John Elway's been able to accomplish in the front office?
I don't think you can separate Peyton Manning's success in Denver from John Elway's success in Denver. I think it's a pretty much perfect correlation between his success and then Manning's success and the team's success, because it's not like Manning just picked the Broncos out of a hat. If you remember back in the 2012, free agency, whatever it was, I don't know, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks where Manning was just kind of, on the market, picking between, I think it was the Texans, the 49ers, the Titans, and the Cardinals, maybe the Seahawks in there at the end. Really stiff competition, and people were offering Peyton Manning a lot, and he was, without a doubt, I think the most coveted free agent in NFL history. And it's not like John Elway lucked into Peyton Manning. He did all that he could. He pulled out all the stops to get Peyton Manning to come to Denver. And to say that the success that the Broncos enjoyed from 2012 to 2015, because they had Peyton Manning on their roster, isn't also a result of what John Elway did to bring him into Denver, I think that's nuts. Like, he deserves credit. Manning deserves credit. The team deserves credit. The defense, whoever, the coaches deserve credit. I don't know why it's a zero-sum thing.
It's not, and that's a great point, and I agree with you. It's not, because you go back and you look at that list of Pro Football Hall of Fame general managers. Al Davis, his first year was in 1966. The quarterbacks that helped him win 69 of his first 100 total games included the likes of Darryl LaMonica, Ken Stabler. You go down the list, you look at Bill Polian in Buffalo with Jim Kelly. You go further, Ron Wolf in Green Bay with Brett Favre, Jim Finks in Minnesota with Fran Tarkenton. So it's impossible to win and be prolific in the NFL as a front office, as a general manager, without that one piece. And so they go hand in hand together, and you got to tip your hat to John Elway at the very least in being able to lube that deal, because as you say, I mean, that was the biggest free agent in the history of the NFL. I mean, Peyton Manning's tour put Reggie White's to shame from the 90s. Yeah. I mean, it was unbelievable. So you tip your hat to him, and back in 2011 with the Von Miller pick, a lot of people say, "Oh, it was a no-brainer." It wasn't.
Absolutely not.
He had Patrick. I mean, there was a big question and a lot of scrutiny on that number 2 overall pick, because you had Cam Newton off the table, gone to Carolina. You had Von Miller. You had Patrick Peterson. Do you know how many draftnik and experts picked the Broncos to take Marcel Darius out of Alabama at that pick?
Almost all of them.
I mean, it was ridiculous. And then you go further down in that draft to guys like J.J. Watt, guys like Aldon Smith. So he had a smorgasbord of options and chose to go with Von Miller. And in that decision is a discerning eye for football, and it proved to be the right one.
Absolutely. I remember watching that draft, and I think up until a few hours before the Broncos were ready to be on the clock, I think they were on the clock for longer than that, just because everybody knew that Carolina was going to take Cam Newton, at least to some extent.
Yep.
People still thought the pick was going to be Marcel Darius, and I thought the pick was going to be Marcel Darius, and it made sense to everybody at the time. But by no means was he the obvious pick. And again, he didn't pick it out of a hat. He and his scouting team looked at it carefully. They looked at the options between him, and that was a draft with Patrick Peterson, Julio Jones, like you said, J.J. Watt, Alden Smith, who went to the 49ers a little bit later.
Yep.
But, he picked, and he picked right. And he picked, at this point, probably next to J.J. Watt, the only guy who's a surefire Hall of Famer at this point.
The premium on edge rushing has changed since 2011, or I should say it's just it's become more valuable to have that guy. And Von Miller is one of the reasons in which it has risen, the value of speed rushers and game-changing outside linebackers. So you got to tip your hat to it. And, we're going to break down 5 questions that are going to determine the fate of the 2017 Broncos. We're also going to take a question or two from the mailbag. But before we do, let me holler at you about being a Mile High Huddle premium member. Many of you listeners have pulled the trigger on premium. We appreciate you. Supports the show, supports the site, allows us to continue to bring you the most in-depth Broncos coverage on the web. But for those who don't know what is premium, every week Mile High Huddle saves our most analytical content for our premium members, whether it's something a little more long form like the State of the Broncos series or a film review like Will did last week on the Trevor Siemian to A.J. Derby connection or X's and O's. The news stories are always going to be free to all, but the in-depth analysis, any insider information we pick up along the way as well, will be reserved for our premium members. And here's how it works. You have 2 options. You can sign up for a monthly membership, which costs $5 per month, or you can go annual, which costs $49 for the year. So you go annual, you save $11 for the year. From there, you get access to all our premium content, including our members-only message boards. So the best way to support Mile High Huddle and also Huddle Up is to go premium. Go to milehighhuddle.com, click the join button in the top menu bar there, and sign up. We love you. We appreciate you. All right, let's talk about this upcoming season for the Broncos. We can't quite say that the Broncos are in uncharted waters, but they do have a new head coach. We got the quarterback controversy continues. We got the failings of last season still haunting the team. They're very much under the gun. Fans and media alike, we all got so used to Peyton Manning's Broncos winning 12 games per year and making it to the playoffs like clockwork. It became predictable, and the excitement of not knowing how a game would shake out by and large didn't really set in until January. But now we got to throw all that out the window. As we learned last year, each and every game the Broncos play is very much in doubt. They have to fight, they have to scrap to win on any given Sunday. Now, after missing the playoffs for the first time since 2010, I thought it would be a fun exercise to address the 5 major questions that will determine the fate of the 2017 Broncos, as I see it, anyway. And I wrote on the subject last week, and the piece did receive some major engagement from Mile High Huddle readers and members, so I thought it would be fun. We'll throw these out to you, Wills, and, of course, do your best to answer them. We'll see where the conversation goes. We'll start with this. Vance Joseph, hired by the Broncos Brain Trust to turn a championship-caliber ship around after it had floundered due to a leadership void, due to a locker room divide, but he's still going to face the same obstacles every first-time rookie NFL head coach must face. So the question is, can Vance Joseph meet Denver's high expectations as a rookie head coach? Because when we talk about the expectations, as we know in Denver, 9-7 does not cut the mustard.
Right. So I'm going to answer your question with another question. And that's what exactly are Vance Joseph's expectations? Because I think if you ask a lot of people in the media, and they'd say, I guess the expectations are making the playoffs, especially after last year when they missed for the first time since 2010. And I think that's a reasonable place to set the bar. And I think that's a really tough situation for any rookie coach. But then I think if you ask a lot of fans, they'll say the expectation's always the Super Bowl. And I think if you're expecting the Super Bowl every year, I don't know about the history and what that says, but I think you'll be disappointed more often than not. So I think if you're expecting a Super Bowl from a rookie head coach, which of course you did get a Super Bowl victory from not a rookie head coach, but a new head coach in Gary Kubiak in his first year.
Yeah.
Right. So I think if you set the bar there, that's probably way too high for Vance Joseph. And I think, he deserves a little bit more slack, inheriting a 9-7 team. But I think it's around 9-7, 10-6, and people don't want to hear that we're maybe expecting another 9-7 season or somewhere like slightly above 500, if not 500. But
right.
I think you set the bar around playoff wild card, somewhere around there. I think that's a fair place to set it. You know,
I think in his first year, I would agree with you. Set the bar at, I mean, you're going to hear John Elway and Vance Joseph every time they're asked this question in a public forum, Super Bowl or bust, baby. And they'll say it with as straight a face as they can muster. But the reality is, you know, it's, as you say, it's a monumental achievement to get to that point. And even though those expectations do exist in the Mile High City, you know, you got to set the bar at a realistic place in which you can achieve it. For the Denver Broncos, I'm with you. If you look at year one for Vance Joseph, letting him get into the swing of things, letting him get some experience as the head coach, making decisions on game day, game planning, managing the team, leading the team. If they set the bar at winning the division, just that's it. Well, our goal is, and it should be the first goal of several for each and every NFL team, and it is.
Right.
If we win the division, so many other dominoes are going to fall. And then from there, we set the bar at this, and then these dominoes fall, and then we can get to the Super Bowl, and if we win it all, you know, we're the champs. So with this team, do you think, in considering the playoffs to be a manageable expectation, do you think that's reasonable? Do you think this is a team who can get there?
I think so. And we've talked about it so much, but a lot of it has to do with the quarterback situation and the offensive line. And, you know, they've addressed the offensive line, but the quarterback situation is the same as last year. So I think if they don't see market improvement in both those areas, it's going to be really tough to make the playoffs in a really competitive AFC West.
Now, to piggyback on the previous question, you look at the Broncos' internal issues that could very well remain in terms of the resentment between the offense and the defense that eventually boiled over late last season. They can't continue, obviously, if the Broncos are going to get back on the winning track, win the AFC West, and then try and contend in the conference in 2017. So we've heard about Vance Joseph being the leader of men, and that being one of the main reasons in which John Elway targeted and hired him to be the head coach. Can the Broncos bridge that locker room divide?
I mean, I don't know that there's necessarily still a divide, and I know that there were a couple incidents last year when especially after that Patriots game when the Broncos offense just couldn't do anything, and the Broncos defense was holding down one of the top 3 offenses in the league in the Patriots with Tom Brady. But I don't think that's going to linger from year to year. I think that was kind of a one-time thing that definitely got blown out of the proportion by the media because that's kind of their job. But I don't think guys from the defense aren't letting guys from the offense sit at their table in the cafeteria or anything. But at the same time, if you want to just kind of look at the question from a different way, what's it going to take for the offense to not necessarily match the defense, but keep up and, hold up their end of the bargain? So I think a lot of that has to do with Mike McCoy and Bill Musgrave developing the quarterbacks. So I think McCoy knows how to fit his offense around his players, and I think that's something that Gary Kubiak didn't do quite as well. I think he was kind of someone that tried to fit a square peg into a round hole, especially if you're talking about Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
But I think, the offense, aside from the coaches, they have the leaders to hold the rest of the offense accountable. I think both Simeon and Lynch are pretty good leaders, maybe different types of personalities, but good leaders. And then Demaryius Thomas, I know, is taking a big leap in his leadership ability this year. Emmanuel Sanders is always vocal, and he's always going to hold them up to a high standard. And then you got C.J. Anderson, who's coming back from injury, who he's just, he's a guy that you want to follow into battle. And so I think with all those guys present, I think they're definitely going to, find a nice mesh point between the offense and the defense this year.
That really is. That is the third question. Can McCoy and Musgrave resurrect the offense? And it's one of the absolute key questions for the Broncos, because if they can solve it, if they can answer it, it kills more than one bird. So, again, you look at the issues that did, and I from what I understand, do exist still to a certain degree. It's not like open animosity, so don't think that. It's little things where the defense is kind of has a superiority complex over the offense. But if the Broncos under McCoy and Musgrave can get the offense back on track, obviously all of a sudden you create a team in which not only, I mean, that's a very difficult team to beat. Let's just say the Broncos manage to, shore up their rushing defense a little bit, get back on track. It's the same defense, by and large, that we've come to expect over the last 2 years. And you put next to that an offense who can actually score points, move the ball, keep the defense fresh, take time off the clock, and all those good things. That's going to be a very tough team to beat. For example, you take the very best of the 2014 Broncos offense, match it with the 2015 defense. That's a championship caliber ball.
That's a juggernaut.
That's a juggernaut.
Depending on what part of the offense, or from what part of the 2014 season you want to pick up that offense from. Like, if you want to take that offense from the Cardinals or the 49ers game and then match it up with the defense from the playoffs, that's maybe the best team I can ever think of.
What I mean by the reason I use 2014 and not 2013 is because 2014 was very good in their own right, but they weren't like the best in the business. That it's a manageable. You can see this team maybe getting to that same kind of heights, because down the stretch that was an offense that faded dramatically.
And it's a similar offense too between Gase and then McCoy. And Kubiak was, he's definitely got his own offense. That's really nothing like anything that McCoy and Gase were running from 2012 or 2011. If you go back to McCoy to when they hired Kubiak.
But the offense gets back on track. All of a sudden, they're winning games, and all of a sudden, this locker room divide is bridged, and we probably don't hear anything more of it moving forward. So that's the third question. Can McCoy and Musgrave resurrect the offense? It solves so many problems if they can. The next one is, can the Broncos stop the run and run the ball? These are two football facets that are fundamental to winning in the league, and the Broncos couldn't do either consistently in 2016. They finished 28th against the run, dropping all the way from the number 3 ranking the year before. And then offensively, they could only muster 92.8 rushing yards per game, which was good for 27th in the NFL. So with what we've seen up to this point, Will, can the Broncos in 2017 stop the run and run the ball?
So, I'll take that first part of the question and say it really depends on the defensive line, because I think Todd Davis and Brandon Marshall did a really good job holding off the run. I know we've got questions about Todd Davis in coverage, but as far as a run stopper, I don't think there's many inside linebackers who are better. So I think it comes down to, is Adam Gotsis really gonna show up and make that leap that everybody's been talking about? Saying that he's chiseled out of marble in his second season. So is he really going to be the guy that comes in opposite of Derek Wolfe and can occupy blockers and eat up that run game? And then at the same time, no one knows who's going to start at nose tackle. Sylvester Williams is a Tennessee Titan right now. They signed 2 guys who can possibly play the position. Domata Peko, who's, there's no question that he is a nose tackle. He's a huge guy, but he's declined a little bit over the last couple of years, and I think that's why Cincinnati was happy to let him walk. Or not happy, but,
willing.
That was acceptable for them. Yeah, they're willing.
Yeah.
And then there's another question if Zach Kerr can play that position, because he's played the 3-4 defensive end, but he's big enough to play nose tackle as well. And so I think if they can find a guy opposite of Wolf, and then especially people are expecting that to be Gotsis, and I think that's the best case scenario if he can make that leap and become the player who, at least Bill Collar thought he was going to be, taking him out of Georgia Tech in the second round last year. And then finding a guy like Kerr or, possibly Peko that can eat up multiple blockers on the inside and draw a double team and let the other guys do their work. I think that's the key to stopping the run. And then running the ball, I think it comes down to the 3 unknown offensive linemen who they picked up in the offseason, starting left to right. Garrett Bowles, we don't know, and his strength is run blocking as opposed to pass blocking. Yep. So I think that's probably the most surefire thing about his game. And then Ronald Leary, he was their prize free agent. They spent a lot of money on him, so we're expecting him to be. He's still an unknown because he didn't play for the Broncos last year, but we have high expectations for him. And then Menelik Watson, he's a really nasty player, like Bowles on the other side, but it's a question of can he stay healthy and for how long can he stay healthy. Right. So I think that's really the key for stopping the run and running the ball.
I wouldn't be surprised, and I'll tell you this, Broncos fans, and I wrote about this when they first signed Zach Kerr. he played predominantly at 5-tech defensive end for the Colts last year in that 3-4, but he also played everywhere on that defensive line. And I wouldn't be surprised. Let me put it this way. Don't be surprised if he ends up winning the starting job at nose tackle. The only caveat to that is the Broncos right out of the gates, because Joseph has a connection in the past with Pecco in his time in Cincinnati. Pecco's already kind of taken on a little bit of a leadership role within the defense, or at least on the defensive line. So that dynamic, it might be hard to bench a guy who's the leader or make him the number 2 rotational guy when he's the leader and put Kerr in there. But don't be surprised if Kerr does end up being your starting nose tackle. And yeah, I'd agree with you. Gotsis is the best case scenario. I think he's on track to be that starter opposite of Wolf. Let's just hope that this setback he had with having to get his knee scoped and some debris cleaned up in his knee, which was not the knee in which he tore his ACL, by the way. Let's hope that he bounces back from that early in camp and is able to continue with this momentum that he's built up during the offseason. Running the ball, heck yeah, so much of it has to do with these 3 offensive linemen that were acquired through free agency and the draft. But one thing that's really going to help them out is this new system, changing back to the power scheme, where it's one-on-one, man-on-man in a phone booth, move them off the block, and open a hole. C.J. Anderson, if he can stay healthy, and, of course, Jamal Charles, if he's even, we've talked about it on the show many times, 70-80% of the player he was 2 years ago, once he's completely healthy. The Broncos could have something very, very special as a running attack, and I'm really excited to see how that might shake out. Of all the questions on this, that's the one that, to me, I feel the most confident. Can the Broncos stop the run and run the ball? I think the measures and the steps they've taken during the offseason to answer those questions already have me very encouraged. Here's the last one, though. Okay, Trevor Siemian, the incumbent at quarterback. He's got 14 starts under his belt. Paxton Lynch, the former first-rounder, is looking to come into his own in year 2. We have a quarterback controversy in Denver for the second straight year, and we've heard it before. Cliches become cliches because they're true. When you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. So, can the Broncos will get clarity at quarterback?
My answer to that question is no, with a capital N and a capital O. So if you think about it as like a 2-pronged, road that you can go either way on, if you go down the Siemian path, if he wins the job out of the starting gate, which I think is still a possibility, the Lynch whispers and the demands for Lynch to play are not going to die down just because he's a first-round pick, and they'll get louder with every mistake Siemian makes. So I don't think anything that he can do short of being the top 10 quarterbacks in the league is going to quiet people down. And I think we're going to hear those Lynch calls no matter who's no matter how well the team is doing, because that's pretty much what happened last year. And then if you go down the Paxton Lynch road, I think I don't think you're going to have calls for Siemian necessarily, at least from most of the fan base or the media for that matter. But I think it's his first year starting, and I think he's going to struggle. So I don't think he's ever going to put the competition to rest. There's always going to be a few people that say, well, we saw that Trevor Siemian could do it last year, and now we're letting this young guy hold the offense back while he tries to figure it out. And then at the same time, you've got this wild card in Chad Kelly. And so if things aren't, solidified by the end of 2017, people are going to be saying, well, Chad Kelly's been sitting on the bench for a year. Maybe it's time to see what he can do. Yep. And so I don't know if Chad Kelly was a great pick if you're thinking about trying to calm down the quarterback controversy talks. But, we'll see.
I can see how some people, and we've talked about this as a hypothetical on the show months back. It was right around, I think, when the season ended. But just I can understand the hypothetical of people saying, if you're going to go with Lynch, you should just trade Trevor Siemian. Just get rid of him. Don't dump him, but trade Trevor Siemian, get some value out of him, whatever value out of him that you can. He's a former 7th-round pick. And give Paxton Lynch an 100% open road as the starter with no noise, whether it's internal or external. Give him the open road to being the man. And I understand that. But at the same time, the Denver Broncos, they don't know exactly what they have in Paxton Lynch. And Trevor Siemian, for all of his limitations, he is a known quantity. And if you imagine the 2016 Denver Broncos with a better offensive line and a defense who could stop the run, you might have seen a very different record come the end of the year. So the Broncos, they don't want to sell out on Trevor Siemian yet, because if Paxton Lynch goes sideways, they need him there to steady the ship. And then I agree with you. If you are trying to minimize the noise around the quarterback situation, adding Chad Kelly doesn't really help all that much. And so what does that really say? What does that really mean? I mean, yeah, he was Mr. Irrelevant, so it was almost like a what the heck flyer on the guy. But if you're trying to get Freudian in that regard, maybe that means that John Elway and the front office, they really aren't all that confident in either Paxton Lynch or Trevor Siemian really taking control of the competition this year. At the very least, they wanted to hedge that bet.
Yeah, I think we're going to come to learn that Chad Kelly might end up being the most relevant, Mr. Relevant, since they started that for the NFL draft.
Absolutely. Well, all right, we skipped the Mile High Mailbag segment last week, but we have time to make it happen today with one question, maybe two. We are your football priests, here to offer absolution and answers to your burning Broncos questions. And our first one comes from @MileHighManiac on Twitter. His question is, or she, how many receivers should/will the Broncos carry on the 53 this year, and who? Will, how many receivers? You start this one off.
So I originally went with 5 just because I looked at what the Chargers carried last year with Mike McCoy as their head coach, and they had 5 out of the gate, and obviously that changed with half their team went on IR, especially Keenan Allen in that the first half of the first game. But brutal. They exited training camp with 5 wide receivers, and so I said, maybe that makes sense. But then I kind of took into consideration a point of emphasis. They want to make the return game. And so I think they do want to have one guy that's, his job is to return footballs, maybe not necessarily be a huge part of the passing game, but he is going to return kicks and punts, and maybe they have different guys there. But I said 6 for that reason. So I think they're going to have 5 guys that are involved on offense, and then another guy who, if there's an injury, he can step in and run some routes, but a kick or a punt returner. But then who? So I said Demaryius Thomas, obviously, as the X, and then Sanders on the other side. In the slot, I think it's going to be Carlos Henderson. I think you're going to have Jordan Taylor behind DT.
Yep.
Benny Fowler on the other side. And then I think you have Isaiah McKenzie, who's the return guy.
Right. I'm with you. I actually agree with you 100%. That's what I wrote about that on Saturday. That's my 6. I think Cody Latimer, his
Great
time
minds.
in Denver is over. So, yeah, I'm with you on the 6. And really, they have to carry 6, not only because of how their draft shook out, but because of special teams. They just got to have that extra body or two for contingencies. And I think that Benny Fowler, Jordan Taylor, Benny Fowler took a little bit of a step back last year, but that was due by and large to his problems with the injury bug. He hurt his elbow right during the preseason, and they still kept him on the roster through all the final cuts, and he just never was quite himself. And, I hate it that the lasting image in most fans' minds of Benny Fowler was that drop touchdown in Tennessee, because he is honestly one of the coolest guys on the team, hard worker, willing to contribute however he can. And I think, when you see him, and this is where Mike McCoy and Bill Musgrave can make a big impact, because when you get the ball into Benny Fowler's hands, he's a freaking beast, dude. He's not a guy that goes down easily. If you guys can remember back to the divisional round against Pittsburgh Steelers, when the Broncos needed that big, I think it was a 3rd and 12, and Manning hit Fowler over the middle on a little, might have been a slam, might have just been a go route down the seam, but he hit him, and then Fowler proceeded to break 3 tackles on the way to a 30-plus yard gain that just set the Broncos up. And so he's very physical, very powerful. You get him the ball in space and let him go, and he can make some things happen. And then Jordan Taylor, this is a guy who is definitely on the come. This is a guy who, right now his value to the team is somewhat limited in that really all he can play is the X. I mean, that's it. That's his gig. And when you have a stud like Demaryius Thomas, when healthy, where does Jordan Taylor fit in? It's hard to, other than spelling him on a few snaps each and every week to keep DT fresh, you don't quite get the same value out of him as maybe someone like Carlos Henderson inside who can play the slot and play outside the numbers. But I still think with Jordan Taylor's ability to, he's always the star of training camp, and he's going to be again this year, making acrobatic catches. He's going to endear himself to the staff. I think he makes the roster again. And Isaiah McKenzie, so long as he doesn't take that proverbial step back once the pads go on, I think he's already shown that he's come to play and win a job. And Carlos Henderson's a shoo-in. So though I agree with you on those 6.
Yep, great minds think alike.
All right, now, bonus question. We'll get out of here. This actually comes from Huddle Up's very own Carl Dumler. He saw us put out the call for some mailbag questions on Twitter and offered up one of his own. I apologize for passing up on the listeners on this one, but I just thought this was a very interesting question, and since we're running out of time, I thought we'd better address it. What is, Carl asks, a less talked about camp battle that has you excited? Now, we're going to actually begin our training camp previews, Will and I, on the show next week, but we might as well wet our beaks a little bit on this one. Your answer for Carl, Will, what is an under-the-radar camp battle that has you excited?
So I briefly mentioned it when I talked about the wide receivers and which ones that they're going to keep after training camp, but I think it's the returner position. So they have kind of like 4 potential guys, plus Cody Latimer has experience returning kicks, and I think so does Juwan Thompson and maybe Benny Fowler. But I think there's 4 main candidates for this job, and they're all either rookies or second-year guys. So you've got Carlos Henderson, Isaiah McKenzie, who they took in the 5th round, Khalif Raymond, who was on the team last year and got called up off the practice squad and did a pretty good job returning kicks and punts.
Yep.
Definitely a lot better than Jordan Norwood was doing at the end of the last year. And then in the 3rd round, they took Brendan Langley, who's a cornerback, who's not necessarily who you'd think right off the bat would be a really effective returner, but he's long and he's got long strides, and he's a good fit for returning kickoffs.
And he has experience.
I think right back in Lamar.
Yep.
So I think they're going to have 2 different guys, because I think they're going to have a different guy returning kicks and another guy returning punts. So I think the best chance, the most likely pick, is Carlos Henderson, because he's got good long speed, and he's a little longer than the guy who I think is going to return punts, because they do require different skill sets. Returning kickoffs, you kind of want a guy who's got good straight line speed, and then when you're returning punts, you want a guy who's a little more shifty and elusive and has got good lateral quickness. So I think it's Henderson is going to be returning kickoffs, and then I think Isaiah McKenzie is going to return punts. He's got really good lateral quickness. He's very elusive. He's been called the human joystick at Georgia, and I think that's kind of what he is. He's the closest thing to Trenton Holiday since Trenton Holiday. Hopefully he's got better ball security, but I think he's going to beat out Khalif Raymond for the punt return gig. Yep. And then I think it'll be between Henderson and Langley for kickoff duties. Cody Latimer there on the bubble in case either of those guys get hurt or just are disasters, which I don't anticipate.
Right. Another, of course, requisite of being a punt returner is catching the ball under pressure, and that separates.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. I mean, there's pressure when you're fielding a kick return as well, but not quite like you still. I mean, you still have a good 20 yards before guys are on you in a kick return. Punt return, man, they're right on top of you, and it takes a very special soul and a very unique professional to be able to handle and manage that pressure and secure the ball. But my under the radar camp battle is tight end. And I think it's really this year you're going to see some scrappy competition at that position, because you've got Jake Butt, who, so long as he doesn't have any major setbacks between now and the final 53, is a shoe-in to at least make the roster out of camp. There's a chance he could be put on the PUP or whatever, but from the sounds of it, I mean, when he was drafted, Elway said he was an August, September guy. And from everything I've heard up to this point, or I should say nothing I've heard up to this point, would lead me to believe he's behind the 8 ball in his progression. So I think Butt's going to be there, and he's going to stir the pot. And then you have A.J. Derby, who was very encouraging with what he was able to accomplish after the Broncos gave up a 5th-round pick to New England to acquire him. You got the veteran in Virgil Green, who's making way too much money to be tight end 2 or 3. And then you've got the former 3rd-round pick, Jeff Heuerman, who really needs to show out this year in order to for the Broncos to keep him around. And then you got another 3 guys, might be 4 more guys, but that are on the roster, including Henry Krieger-Coble. So it's a great mix, and the Broncos really need to get some clarity at this position, because you look at what Mike McCoy has been able to do with that position in San Diego. I mean, last year the Broncos got decimated by both Antonio Gates and Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry, if I recall right, had 2 touchdowns in the first game against the Broncos. So it's a position that if you can get it going and you can get 2 guys, it can make all the difference in the world to your offense and serve as that kind of security blanket for your young quarterback that they can count on third down. So for me, I'm really excited, not only because of what the tight end position can do for this offense and helping it get out of the doldrums, but just because there's so many personalities and so much, you got draft pedigrees, you've got salary cap questions, you've got rookie guys. It'll be really interesting to see how the tight ends shake out.
Right, and I think another question we have to ask ourselves, and I said that the Broncos would keep 6 wide receivers, and you agreed with that, but it's going to be tough if they keep 6 wide receivers out of camp to also keep 4 tight ends, because looking at how Mike McCoy ran things last year with the Chargers, he had 5 wide receivers and 3 tight ends out of camp. So those 2 extra roster spots make a big difference, and especially with the depth that Denver has on defense. You don't want to give away guys like that. So it'll be tough to keep if you do leave camp with 6 wide receivers. Maybe it's Virgil Green who's cut, especially to save money, or they give up on Jeff Hireman or whoever. But it's going to be tough to get all 4 of those guys on the roster.
Yeah, and we're going to go deeper into position battles and kind of projecting what we can expect in training camp starting next week. But for today, that's all the time we have for the show. And we'll also get to the Los Angeles Chargers edition of Know Your Enemy here within the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned for that. Again, follow the show on Twitter at HuddleUpPod. You can find Will in the Twitterverse at WillKey6 and myself at Chad N. Jensen. Tweet us your questions, and we will try to address your concerns on the show as often as we can. And don't forget to subscribe, y'all. For Will, I'm Chad. We'll talk to you soon.
Mile High Huddle.